What would you do if suddenly your daughter decided to move away from home and went missing less than a week later? How would you feel if your close friend and coworker who never misses a day doesn't turn up? What would you think if your new roommate never came home from work and her things are rummaged through days later? These are the questions that Birgitta Åkerlund's loved ones had to ponder in July of 1970, when the kind, conscientious young woman vanished into thin air. Karin Birgitta Åkerlund was born on the 18th of April 1950 to parents Reino and Aili. The family lived in Espoo, which is a city located right outside of western Helsinki. Birgitta seemed to have been a type A personality, economical, organized, and level-headed. After she finished her studies in 1967, she got a job in Helsinki as an office assistant. She saved money from her earnings and traveled to Denmark and France. As you might expect, she had detailed travel plans for both trips, which both went very smoothly, especially since she spoke both Finnish and English, as well as some basic Swedish. On her trip to France, she met a boy who she kept in contact with through letters. It's not entirely clear if the relationship was romantic, but he kept sending her letters even up till a year after her disappearance. To anyone's knowledge, Birgitta wasn't seeing anyone here in Finland at the time that she vanished. After Birgitta turned 20, she saw an ad in the newspaper where another young woman, Seija, was looking for a roommate in Helsinki. The place was a small one-room apartment right on Main Street, which would make her commute to work much easier. For the past 3 years, Birgitta had traveled to work from her parents' home in Espoo. She contacted Seija about the apartment, and Birgitta had moved in by July of 1970. The conscientious young woman as she was, she had immediately paid her portion of the rent for that month. Only 5 days after her move, Birgitta would disappear. On the 10th of July, Birgitta was getting ready for work as usual. She mentioned to her roommate Seija that she might go pick some strawberries from her grandmother's garden that weekend. Her grandma lived in Espoo in an area called Kauklahti, where her parents also lived. Birgitta didn't specify if she planned to leave the same day or if she'd stay at her grandma's house for the night. Regardless, she left for work as usual. Her physical description from that day is as follows. She had blue eyes and bleached blonde hair. She was 160 centimeters or 5 feet 3 inches tall, and she had a thin build. She was wearing long black pants, a light pink blouse, a long beige wool jacket, and matching dark blue shoes and handbag. In her bag, she is thought to have been carrying one of her 2 bank books, some money, makeup, jewelry, and some photographs. The contents of her bag have caused a lot of speculation, especially the photos, but we'll come back to this later. Because the newspapers say that her workplace only started worrying on the next Monday, I assume that she did arrive at work that day, which was a Friday. But this is not corroborated and is once again a point of contention in this case. The next and possibly the last sighting of Birgitta was from that evening around 11:30 p.m. She was seen outside of the old student house downtown. She was accompanied by a young, around 20-year-old man who went by the nickname Mokke. He was 175 centimeters or 5 foot 9 inches tall with a heftier build, and he had brown, longish hair and a mustache. The sighting does not indicate that Birgitta was in any distress. After this sighting, Birgitta has never been seen again. She never arrived at her grandma's house, or back at the apartment, or anywhere else for that matter. On Monday, she didn't turn up at work at her office in Hakaniemi, which immediately worried everyone. Birgitta never missed her shift without at least calling beforehand. She had just vanished into thin air. As if her disappearance wasn't mysterious enough on its own, some strange things started happening at Birgitta and Seija's apartment. Some days after the disappearance, Seija saw that Birgitta's things had been rummaged through. Apparently, the groundskeeper had let some people in, who claimed to be Birgitta's co-workers. It's not clear what they had been looking for or if they had found it. Seija also testified that around the same time period, she had been home alone one evening at 8 p.m. when someone had tried to open the door with their own key. But after trying for a while, they were unable to and left. When Seija finally got the courage to go check on the door, to her horror, the lock was left on her hand as she opened it. Whoever had tried getting in had broken it and was nowhere to be seen out in the hallway. Birgitta's disappearance was only being reported on weeks later after it had happened, and according to Seija, police hadn't been taking it seriously at all. While talking about Birgitta's case in a magazine article years later, the police brought up that many students disappear for a bit during the spring after getting bad grades and whatnot. I don't know why they would bring that up because Birgitta was not a student anymore. She had been working for the past 3 years. She also disappeared in the summer, not in the spring. Seija claims that police implied that Birgitta had just gone on summer holiday, but this also doesn't seem likely. Seija said, "I feel like the police didn't take the case seriously enough in the beginning. Her summer holiday was starting very soon in August. Why would she have run off in July? It feels completely senseless that a person can just vanish into thin air like this." Birgitta's loved ones believe that her disappearance was due to foul play. The vast majority of missing persons cases are solved quickly, with the person found alive, and the rest tend to be accidents or suicides. Only a very small fraction of these cases are murders. So, considering those facts, I usually don't believe foul play is involved. But in Birgitta's case, the circumstances are quite bizarre. Like what Seija said about someone looking through Birgitta's things and trying to break in, and the fact that she was possibly last seen late at night with an unknown man. So, what happened? This case involves some pretty crazy speculation online since there are so few known facts to base anything off of. Firstly, let's return back to the photos I mentioned earlier, the ones Birgitta was carrying with her in her purse. A lot of people question how Seija knew that the pictures were in her purse to begin with, and I suppose they're trying to say that she's suspicious somehow. But it's possible that Seija had just seen them or they had been mentioned to her before. But the more pressing question is, at least to me, that what did the pictures depict? One popular theory seems to be that Birgitta was having an affair with a married man and she was blackmailing him with some photos of them together. While that's a very juicy and interesting story, there's not really anything to back that theory up. And I suspect that if it was true, Seija or one of Birgitta's other friends would have probably known at least something about it. In my opinion, the pictures probably don't have anything to do with the disappearance itself. She may have been planning to show some pictures to her grandma, or maybe she just carried them with her because they were sentimental. I've known people who carry Polaroid photos with them. It's not that crazy to me. The jewelry and makeup in her bag have likewise caused some discussion. Some believe it may indicate that she was planning on meeting someone that day, which is why she wanted to look nice. This could be the case, but it could also be that she didn't have time or energy to get fully ready at home before leaving and decided to finish up during her commute or at the office. The makeup could have also been the type that you need to touch up later, like powder or lipstick, which is why she was carrying it. One forum poster questioned whether Birgitta had taken her jewelry with her to pawn it, but I don't see why. It wouldn't have been for money, since Birgitta had savings, which she never touched after her disappearance. Now then, where could she have been going to? Some people believe she may have traveled abroad, since she had done so in the past and had the language skills to do it. But how and why? Her passport and all her clothes were found at the apartment. She doesn't seem to have gone to her French boyfriend or friend because he didn't know she was missing for a whole year. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been sending her letters, right? Unless he sent the letters as some sort of bluff. Some speculate that maybe Birgitta was pregnant and she wanted to go abroad to get an abortion or to give the child away, But again, there's no evidence for this. That's the problem with every theory. What about the co-workers who rummaged through Birgitta's things? Was someone from work responsible for her disappearance? This is a really, really popular theory. Could that someone have been secretly in love with her or having an affair with her? What did they try to find? Something that Birgitta had something important from work at the apartment, which someone tried to retrieve. Maybe she had brought some paperwork with her to proofread or transcribe. But if that is the case, what on earth was it? There's a strong suspicion online that the papers contain some really sensitive information, perhaps even something illegal, and that Birgitta had been eliminated for it. Some think that Birgitta was a spy and handled some political paperwork. One forum poster, called Edna, who worked at a different Helsinki-based office in the 70s, said that a robbery had happened there in the middle of the day. That office paid salaries in cash, and the payday happened to be approaching soon, so the safe had a lot of money in it. The robbers, who were never caught, threatened the employees with guns and took the money. The employees believed that someone who worked with the safe must have been in on the plan. How else would they have known about the salaries? I think the poster is implying that something like this may have happened at Birgitta's office as well, and that she was somehow involved, perhaps. Another person on the same forum, using the pseudonym KKR, who claims to have known Birgitta and had worked at the same office, wrote in 2016, Gitta was working at the office which handled accidents and injuries, and could not have defrauded or robbed anything. In my opinion, there was absolutely no man at the office that Gitta would have been interested in. She was a drug-free, beautiful young woman who had a lot of friends at work. If I remember correctly, her friends had even gone looking for her and had searched her apartment. Her friends even visited a medium who claimed that she had been buried into the woods in Espoo. At that time, there were some dangerous people roaming around who would definitely have been interested in a beautiful woman like her. At that time, I was a courier in the same firm as her. Gitta had been seen with a soldier who returned back to Santahamina Island. After that, there doesn't seem to be any sign of her. In another comment, KKR writes, in my previous comment, I mentioned that Birgitta worked at the Accidents and Injuries Bureau, which was located in Hakaniemi on the street called Pitkän sillan ranta. I started working as a courier for the organization in 1967. Gitta had already started there by then. The office handled mostly disabled war veterans' pensions, as well as their widows' and orphans' pensions. The same office also handled government employees' accident and compensations and such. I think that spy theories and other such nonsense stories are unlikely. There was no way to commit fraud or scam money from that office, since we didn't handle money directly. I do remember her friends being vehemently questioned in relation to the rummaging of her apartment, though. Birgitta and I didn't spend time together outside of work, because I had my own friends elsewhere. I still believe in the theory that a completely random person murdered her, unless the lock breaking is involved. So, if KKR's words can be trusted, the people who rummaged through Birgitta's things were in fact just concerned friends from her workplace, and it seemed that her life at work was pretty ordinary. One interesting detail is the soldier thing. As you may remember, Birgitta was last seen talking to a young man in downtown Helsinki, someone who went by the nickname Mokke. People claim that the word mokkeri means rookie in army slang, which could be where this young guy got the nickname Mokke from. Mokke was not reported to be a soldier in any of the news reports I read, but KKR's comment as well as others lead me to believe that this is somehow like common knowledge to people who know this case. People claim that he was questioned, but ultimately he returned back to his duties. Now, for the craziest and yet the most popular theory is that Karin Birgitta Åkerlund changed her name and started a new life as Birgitta Marlene Silander, who herself went missing in 2015. Now, Birgitta Silander's case is quite baffling in itself, but I'll summarize it for you so you have the context necessary for this theory. Birgitta Marlene Silander was a 65-year-old woman who had been working as a hairdresser in Helsinki for decades, at least since the 70s. At the time of her disappearance, she was living alone in a neighborhood called Viikki in northeastern Helsinki. She used to own the salon that she worked at, but had just sold it to her colleague less than a year earlier. Birgitta still took some clients though, and had some bookings for the week after her disappearance. In terms of family, she had some relatives and a boyfriend who lived in another municipality. On the day of her disappearance, 24th of August 2015, Birgitta was supposed to meet up with her colleague at the salon at 3 p.m. Since she lived alone, nobody saw her leave her house or what clothing she was wearing, but her bus card was used at 2:42 at the metro station and her phone connected to the cell tower downtown, only hundreds of meters away from the salon. But she never turned up at the meeting and she's never been seen since. Birgitta didn't leave behind a note or pack her things. She still had commitments for the future. As far as anyone knew, she hadn't been acting out of character and she wasn't ill. The last time it seems that someone she knew actually saw her was her boyfriend the previous morning. I assume that he's been investigated, but since the case is still unsolved in 2026, I doubt anything substantial was found at the time. The only clue that has since surfaced is the fact that Birgitta apparently had a secret lover in Italy, a fact that the police have not directly verified. That, of course, brings out the possibility that Birgitta may have traveled abroad. But I think it's extremely unlikely that Birgitta could have traveled completely anonymously and in an untraceable way as recently as 2015. Another theory could be that her boyfriend found out about the affair and killed her. But again, he's never been arrested or publicly named as a suspect, nor has her body ever been found. Police have said that they don't suspect foul play in this case. Her case, as you see, is just as baffling as the other Birgittas. But why is it that these two cases are connected to each other than the obvious fact that the women share a first name? Well, they were born only months apart, so they're the same age, if both are alive, that is. Some people think that they look similar to each other. After all, they're both white women with bleached hair and blue eyes, as well as kind of vaguely similar facial structures. They both worked in Helsinki. Then there are the connections abroad. Both women seem to have traveled in Europe and had partners there. As a pretty skeptical person, I don't believe in this theory at all. I can understand why people are drawn to it, because it's pretty interesting, but I think it's complete nonsense. All the so-called connections between these women, such as the same age and the name, are super generic. Of course, two women born around the same time could share a name that is popular in that time period. There are probably tens, if not hundreds more blonde, similar-aged Birgittas in Helsinki. I personally don't think that the women even look like each other, but I suppose that is subjective. What do you think? Then there are the obvious problems like the women's completely separate families and the fact that Birgitta Silander was already a hairdresser by the time that Birgitta Åkerlund started working at her office job in 1967. And, to be honest, if the two women were the same person, how would it help us at this point? It doesn't answer any questions. In fact, it only brings up more. The theory that I find the most fascinating is that Birgitta was the victim of serial killer Ensio Koivunen. I will make a whole video about his case in the near future, but in summary, Ensio abducted and murdered 3 hitchhikers around southern Finland in the summer of 1971. His victims were 23-year-old Salme Metsänikula and 17-year-old friends Ritva Rajas and Pirjo Laiho. Ensio killed his victims in his car using carbon monoxide and dumped their bodies to places familiar to him. He also kept some of his victims' belongings. Birgitta was in the same age range as his other victims, and since some believe that she may have been trying to hitchhike on the day that she vanished, she would have been his dream target. Since Birgitta has never been found, we don't know what her cause of death was or if she was missing any of her items. People have suggested that Ensio, who was basically a career criminal, was not in prison at the time of the disappearance, but I can't say this as a fact. A few other cases, such as the unsolved murder of Leila Beksyef in 1969, have also been rumored to be connected to Ensio Koivunen. Because of the crazy publicity Ensio Koivunen received in the media, I'm sure Birgitta's parents must have heard about his crimes and considered the possibility that their daughter was one of his victims. But her parents have claimed that she wasn't the type to hitchhike, and she resisted even when her friends pressured her to do so. I'm inclined to believe them. Of course, they knew her best, but I suppose we will never know the reality of things. She might have just told her parents that she doesn't hitchhike just to, calm them down. Birgitta Åkerlund was pronounced dead in 2002, and her date of death has been marked as 1st of January 1981, a little over 10 years after her disappearance. If she were alive today, Birgitta would be 76 years old. Birgitta's case has gone completely cold and is not being investigated anymore. It was hardly publicized in the 70s, and most people, even those interested in Finnish true crime, have never heard of her. While I think it's unlikely that we'll ever have the answers after such a long time, especially considering that police have destroyed a lot of the case files from the 70s and 80s, I still think this is worth investigating. At the very least, I still hope that at least her body can be found one day and laid to rest with her parents. If you have any relevant information in this case, I advise you to contact the Finnish police on a non-emergency line. You can also comment down below what you think. Thank you for spending this time with Birgitta and I, and have a nice day.